Okay, so are you ready to take a deep dive into Litecoin?
Always ready for a crypto deep dive.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about a coin with as much history and potential as Litecoin.
Right. Litecoin's been around for a while now, and we've got a ton of articles here with some analysts saying it could hit almost $500 by 2030.
$500. That's a pretty bold prediction.
It is, but we also have articles suggesting there might be some bumps in the road for Litecoin, some pretty strong resistance levels it needs to break through.
Ah, yes, resistance levels. Those can definitely put a damper on things.
And then there's all this buzz about a Litecoin ETF potentially launching later this year.
The ETF buzz is definitely real.
So we've got a lot to unpack here. Should we just jump right in?
Let's dive in.
All right, let's start with the basics. For anyone who might not be super familiar, what exactly is Litecoin?
Well, in a nutshell, Litecoin is a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency. It was created back in 2011 by Charlie Lee, a former Google engineer, and it was actually forked from Bitcoin.
So it shares some similarities with Bitcoin, but with some key differences, right?
Exactly. It's often described as the silver to Bitcoin's gold.
Okay, I like that analogy. So what are some of those key differences that set Litecoin apart from Bitcoin?
Well, one of the biggest ones is speed. Litecoin's transaction speeds are significantly faster. We're talking about transactions being confirmed in about 2.5 minutes on average, compared to Bitcoin's 10 minutes.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference, especially if you're thinking about using it for everyday purchases.
Right. Imagine waiting 10 minutes for your coffee to be processed.
Yeah, no thanks. I need my caffeine fix ASAP.
Another key difference is the algorithm used for mining. Litecoin uses an algorithm called Script, which is more memory intensive than Bitcoin's SHA-256 algorithm.
And what does that mean in practical terms?
Well, it means that Litecoin mining is more accessible to everyday users. You don't need those specialized ASIC miners that are required for Bitcoin. You can actually mine Litecoin with GPUs, which are more readily available.
Oh, interesting. So it's more decentralized in that sense.
Exactly. It levels the playing field a bit.
Yeah.
And then there's the block size. Litecoin has a larger block size than Bitcoin, which allows for more transactions to be processed per block.
So even faster transaction speeds and higher throughput. Okay, I'm starting to see why people are excited about Litecoin.
And one more thing, the max supply. Litecoin has a maximum supply of 84 million coins, which is 4 times higher than Bitcoin's 21 million.
Got it. So Litecoin has some solid fundamentals behind it: fast transactions, lower fees, more accessible mining, and a decent supply. But it's also been around for a while. Like you said, it launched in 2011. What does its price history tell us?
Well, that's where things get interesting. One of the sources pointed out that Litecoin has been trading within a fairly narrow range between $95 and $140 since November of last year.
So it's been kind of stuck in a rut.
You could say that. It seems to be facing some resistance at those higher levels.
Ah, yes, the dreaded resistance levels. One of the articles mentioned a few specific price points that are acting as psychological barriers for traders. I think they mentioned $135 in the short term, then $145, $145.
To the big one, $180.
$180. Why is that such a crucial level for Litecoin?
Well, if you look back at its historical performance, you'll see that Litecoin struggled to break through that $180 mark for a significant period back in 2021. It eventually did, but it took a lot of effort, and when it finally broke through, it surged to over $280.
Wow, so traders are going to be watching that $180 level very closely.
Absolutely. If Litecoin can break through that level convincingly, it could trigger a wave of FOMO, that fear of missing out, from traders who missed the previous rally, and that could push the price even higher.
Okay, so breaking through $180 is a big deal for Litecoin, but even if it manages to do that, there's still another factor we need to consider, right? Profit taking.
Ah, yes, profit taking. That's the double-edged sword of any bull run.
One of the articles mentioned that a whopping 73% of Litecoin holders are currently in profit. That's a lot of people sitting on potential gains. What happens if they all decide to cash out?
It could create significant downward pressure on the price. Imagine Litecoin starts to climb, maybe even breaks through that $180 level, and then suddenly a bunch of those early holders decide to sell and lock in their profits.
So it's like a sudden rush for the exits, everyone trying to cash in their chips at the same time.
Exactly. And we've actually seen this happen before with Litecoin. A couple of sources highlighted 2 specific instances, December 2024 and March 2025, where Litecoin reached price peaks, but those peaks coincided with holder profitability levels of 84% and 72% respectively. And what happened shortly after?
The price crashed.
It corrected significantly. As people took profits, the buying pressure eased up and the price came down.
That's a pretty clear pattern. So it's not just about Litecoin reaching these price targets, it's about whether it can sustain those gains in the face of potential selling pressure.
Precisely. And that brings us to one of the most talked about factors influencing Litecoin's future: the potential for a Litecoin ETF.
Ah, yes, the ETF buzz. The articles we've seen are giving it a 90% chance of approval this year. But for those who might not be familiar with all the financial jargon, can you quickly explain what an ETF is and why it's such a big deal for Litecoin?
Sure. An ETF, or exchange-traded fund, is essentially a basket of assets, in this case, Litecoin, that's traded on a traditional stock exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange.
So it makes it easier for everyday investors to get exposure to Litecoin without having to deal with the complexities of cryptocurrency exchanges.
Exactly. It opens up Litecoin to a much wider pool of investors, including institutional investors who might have been hesitant to dive into the crypto world before.
Okay, that makes sense. Increased accessibility usually translates to increased demand, which could drive up the price.
Precisely. And that's why so many people are excited about the prospect of a Litecoin ETF.
But the SEC decision isn't expected until October, right? So we've got a bit of a waiting game on our hands.
True. But that anticipation itself could be a factor in how Litecoin's price fluctuates between now and then.
Okay, so we've got this potential ETF looming on the horizon, which could be a major catalyst for Litecoin's price. But let's dig into those specific price predictions, shall we? Some of those articles were throwing out some pretty impressive numbers.
They were. For instance, Cohen Codex suggests Litecoin could reach anywhere between $139 and $483 by 2030. Interestingly, their prediction hinges on Litecoin gaining traction in emerging markets, particularly in Southeast Asia, where its speed and low fees are really attractive.
Oh, that's a good point. It's not just about the technology itself, but also where and how it's being adopted.
Absolutely. And Changelly is even more optimistic. They're predicting a potential high of $1,041 by 2030.
Wow, $1,000 Litecoin.
Yeah.
That's wild. But with those resistance levels and the potential for profit taking, it sounds like Litecoin's future is still quite uncertain. It's like a high-stakes game with a lot of moving parts.
That's a great analogy. Litecoin is at a crucial juncture. Its success will depend on a complex interplay of factors, both internal and external.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork here. We know Litecoin has some strong fundamentals and potential for growth, but there are also some significant hurdles to overcome. I'm eager to dig deeper into those challenges and explore how Litecoin might navigate them.
Me too. There's a lot more to uncover here.
So before the break, we were talking about these key price resistance levels for Litecoin.
Yeah, those levels are definitely something to watch. They represent points where the price might struggle to move higher.
Okay, that makes sense. But what exactly creates these resistance levels in the first place? Is it like a psychological thing, or is there something more to it?
It's a bit of both, actually. You see, traders and investors tend to remember those price points where Litecoin has struggled in the past.
So like a collective memory of past battles fought and lost, right?
Exactly. And that memory can make them hesitant to buy, or even more inclined to sell when those levels are retested.
So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If enough people believe a certain price level will act as resistance, their actions can actually make it so.
Precisely. And that's why those price points we mentioned earlier, like 135, 140, 145, and especially 180, are so crucial to watch. They represent potential roadblocks on Litecoin's path to higher prices.
Got it. So let's say Litecoin does manage to break through those resistance levels. We've still got that profit-taking risk to worry about, right? That possibility of a mass exodus of holders cashing in their gains.
That's right. And this brings us to another interesting aspect that was highlighted in one of the sources, the psychological profile of Litecoin holders.
Ooh, tell me more. What insights did they offer about the Litecoin investors?
Well, they categorize Litecoin holders into three main groups: the long-term believers, the momentum traders, and the swing traders.
Okay, I'm familiar with the terms momentum traders and swing traders. They're always chasing those short-term price swings. But who are these long-term believers?
These are the folks who are truly bought into Litecoin's vision as a faster, more efficient payment system. They tend to hold their Litecoin for much longer periods, often ignoring those short-term price fluctuations.
So they're in it for the long haul, not just a quick buck.
Exactly. They believe in Litecoin's fundamentals and its potential to disrupt the traditional financial system.
That's pretty inspiring, actually, to have that kind of conviction in an asset class that can be so volatile.
It is. And according to the source, the percentage of long-term believers within the Litecoin community is quite high compared to other cryptocurrencies.
Interesting. So that could be a positive sign for Litecoin's stability, right? Even if the momentum traders jump ship, those long-term holders might provide a solid base of support for the price.
That's the idea. Their presence could help to mitigate the impact of those profit-taking events we talked about earlier.
Okay, so we've got the potential for long-term holders to act as a kind of stabilizing force for Litecoin, even amidst the volatility. But we also need to consider Litecoin's performance in relation to the broader crypto market, right? It's not just about Litecoin in isolation.
Absolutely. One source made a fascinating comparison between Litecoin and Bitcoin, highlighting their historical correlation.
The dynamic duo of crypto? What did they find?
They pointed out that Litecoin's price movements have often mirrored Bitcoin's trends, but with amplified swings.
So if Bitcoin goes up, Litecoin tends to follow, but with bigger jumps.
Exactly. And the same goes for downward movements. When Bitcoin falls, Litecoin often falls even harder.
So Litecoin is like Bitcoin's more volatile little brother.
That's a good way to think about it. And this correlation suggests that Litecoin's fate is to some extent tied to Bitcoin's performance. If Bitcoin enters a bull market, Litecoin is likely to benefit. But if Bitcoin crashes, Litecoin could be in for a rough ride.
So we need to keep an eye on both Litecoin's individual performance and Bitcoin's overall market trends.
Exactly. It's all about looking at the whole picture.
Okay, that makes sense. But with all this talk about Bitcoin and its influence on Litecoin, I'm starting to wonder about Litecoin's own unique place in the crypto world. Does it have any special features or advantages that set it apart from Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies?
That's a great question. And it's something that several sources touched on. Litecoin was initially created as a faster, more efficient version of Bitcoin, and it still largely holds true to those principles. It boasts faster transaction speeds, lower fees, and a different mining algorithm that allows for more decentralized participation.
So it's still living up to its original promise of being a more practical and accessible cryptocurrency for everyday use.
Exactly. And these features have attracted a loyal following of users and developers who appreciate Litecoin's simplicity and efficiency.
Okay, so it's got that going for it. But are there any other areas where Litecoin stands out or could potentially make a bigger impact in the future?
One area that some sources highlighted is Litecoin's potential role in the growing world of decentralized finance, or DeFi.
DeFi. That's the whole concept of building financial applications on top of blockchain networks, right? It's like creating a parallel financial system that's transparent, open, and accessible to everyone.
Exactly. And while Ethereum is currently the dominant platform for DeFi, Litecoin's faster transaction speeds and lower fees could make it a compelling alternative for certain DeFi applications.
Interesting. So Litecoin could potentially carve out a niche for itself in the DeFi space, leveraging its speed and affordability to attract developers and users who are looking for a more efficient platform.
Precisely. And that's why it's important to look beyond just Litecoin's price and consider its broader applications and potential use cases.
Okay, so we've got Litecoin's core strengths as a payment system, its potential role in DeFi, and its historical correlation with Bitcoin. That's a lot to digest. I'm really starting to appreciate the complexities of Litecoin's journey.
Me too. It's a fascinating case study in the evolution of cryptocurrency and its potential impact on the financial landscape.
This is getting really interesting. But I think we need to pause here for a moment and come back for the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore some of those lingering questions about Litecoin's future and wrap up our analysis.
Sounds good. We'll see you back here shortly for the grand finale.
Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up this Litecoin deep dive.
I think so. We've covered a ton of ground here, haven't we?
We have. We've talked about Litecoin's technology, those price predictions, the hurdles it faces like profit taking, even its connection to Bitcoin's movements. But before we officially wrap things up, is there anything else we should touch on?
Well, we've talked a lot about the specifics of Litecoin itself, but I think it's also important to think about Litecoin's place in the wider world,
You mean like the bigger picture of global finance and all that?
Exactly. Because the world is changing, right? Especially when it comes to money and finance. We're seeing this shift toward digital currencies, decentralized systems, and it makes you wonder, where does Litecoin fit into all of this?
Okay, so we need to zoom out a little bit and think about Litecoin not just as a cryptocurrency, but as a potential player in this whole transformation of finance.
Right. And one thing that came up in a few of the sources was this growing interest in cryptocurrencies from, get this, central banks and governments.
Oh, wow, really? I mean, some countries are even experimenting with their own central bank digital currencies, right?
Exactly, CBDCs. And I know it might seem like CBDCs are like competition for cryptocurrencies like Litecoin, but they could actually end up paving the way for greater adoption and integration.
How so? How could they help?
Well, think about it. As central banks and governments become more comfortable with the whole concept of digital currencies, right? It could lead to a more favorable regulatory environment for cryptocurrencies in general.
Okay, so it's like a legitimacy thing. Once those CBDCs become mainstream, people will be more open to the idea of cryptocurrencies as a whole.
Exactly. And Litecoin, with its focus on simplicity and ease of use, could really benefit from that. It's seen as a more approachable entry point into the crypto world compared to some of those, well, more complex alternatives out there.
Right, so if we imagine a future where digital currencies are just commonplace, Litecoin could potentially play a role as a widely used payment system, even alongside those CBDCs.
It's definitely possible. And some sources even suggested that Litecoin's technology could be integrated into CBDC systems themselves.
Wow. So not just coexisting, but actually becoming a part of the system itself.
Think about its speed and low fees. Those are pretty attractive features, even for central banks.
That's pretty amazing to think about. So it's not just about the price of Litecoin or those short-term predictions. It's about its role in shaping the future of finance.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important takeaway for our listeners. It's about looking beyond the hype and the speculation and thinking about the long-term potential of this technology.
I totally agree. So I think we've done a pretty thorough job of unpacking all this, wouldn't you say?
I think so. We've explored Litecoin's whole journey. Its beginnings as a faster Bitcoin, its strengths as a payment system, those potential roadblocks, the possibility of an ETF, and now its potential role in a world of CBDCs and even decentralized finance.
Wow, it's been quite the ride. But at the end of the day, it's up to each individual listener to decide what all of this means for them.
Absolutely. What are their goals, their risk tolerance? What do they believe in when it comes to the potential of cryptocurrency?
Those are the questions they need to ask themselves.
We've given them the knowledge, the different perspectives. Now they need to take that and figure out their own path.
Exactly. Choose wisely, invest responsibly, and enjoy the ride.
And never stop learning. This crypto world is always changing, so stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Words to live by. Thanks for joining us for this Litecoin deep dive, everyone. Until next time, happy investing.